So I didn't film a video in a long time for you guys. I have an announcement to make. I officially stopped performing ritual for hire for other people. I found better financial opportunities. I manifested those opportunities, and right now I am in much better place to live, and I have no need to perform ritual for hire for anybody. Really. So after we made this announcement, I also have to say that I will almost completely leave social media. The only media I will be on is YouTube and BitChute. I will almost completely leave Facebook, so if I ghost Facebook and don't publish on Facebook as much, don't take it personally. I am just sick of the drama. Now, today we will talk about controversial topics, and since this channel won't be commercial anymore, I have right to say whatever I wanna say. And from now on, this channel will be much more controversial. So today we'll talk about vampiric lore and what vampires are. And I will speak a little bit about Vlad Dracul also. Now, vampires are beings from Serbian Slavic folklore, but they are also present in Romania. Word vampir entered popular culture from Slavic language, and the way we see vampires is really different from how modern popular culture sees vampiric beings. 9 out of 10 facts, quote-unquote facts, you heard about vampires in modern fucking occultism do not come from traditional Slavic lore. It is complete invention of popular culture. So, a vampire in Slavic lore is present in 3 different forms. One form of the vampire, or one being classified as a vampire, is some kind of spirit of the dead which is like a monstrosity, and it attaches to people and eats them. And it also attaches to cattle and drinks their blood, drinks their life essence. That's the first thing classified as a vampire. Another thing classified as a vampire is a person which literally is dead but is able to physically rise from the grave and drink the blood of his neighbors, other people, etc. So, a reanimated, conscious, undead corpse. That's the second thing classified as a vampire. And the third thing classified as a vampire is really a witch, initiated into certain mysteries. Of the certain divinity we will talk in this video. So let's examine it and explain it once again. Vampire is, according to the Slavic lore, one of the 3 things. One is some version of necromantic parasite which attaches to people and cattle. It's not clear is that parasite astral or physical. It depends who you ask. Then it can also be reanimated corpse of somebody who is dead, and then that corpse is drinking blood. Depending on who you ask and which source you consult, sometimes that corpse is simply predatory beast, and sometimes it retains powers and knowledge of living guy, as well as possesses many supernatural abilities. So, how conscious that corpse is, and how powerful that corpse is, or that reanimated vampire is, depends on which lore you consult and who you ask. And the third being classified as a vampire is pretty much which initiated into Mysteries of Morana. Now, Morana is in modern occultism known as the Snow Queen, but calling Morana Snow Queen is like calling Lilith Gothic Edgelord. It doesn't describe her at all. According to Slavic lore, Morana is really complex and rich deity in mysteries and legends. By the way, you have more preserved legends about Morana than about all other gods combined. For some crazy reason, Morana remained pretty much undisturbed and uncut by the Christianization of the Slavic lands. Her lore remained really intense and present. I will explain those legends in future videos. But for the sake of this one, vampire or vampir in Slavic lore is pretty much also which initiated into Mysteries of Morana. And to make things clear, I work with the divinity, and what she teaches is really controversial stuff. She is not deity for the weakens, light workers, and the faint of heart. And what she teaches also comes out of boundaries of what we should consider conventional black magic. She is really a thing on its own. So, to make things clear, I will now talk about one really famous vampire, who probably wasn't vampire at all. I will talk about Vlad Dracul, also known as the Vlad the Impaler. And in many modern occult circles, Vlad the Impaler is depicted as some kind of a vampiric adept. And I need to disappoint those individuals, because Vlad the Impaler was not a vampire. He was a draconian knight. Let me explain. Dracul originally doesn't mean vampire or Dracula. It means dragon. Dracul means dragon. So Vlad Dracul literally means Vlad the dragon. So let me give you a little bit of historical context. So in the Balkan Peninsula, when the lands were Christianized, people were practically oriented. So instead of fighting with the church over the old gods, they simply masked the old gods. So they simply named their gods saints and continue working with the gods as saints. But fairies and dragons couldn't be turned into saints, so they continued working with fairies and dragons underground. And also with some chthonic divinities. By the way, they simply called their chthonic divinities demons and ended the discussion there. Demons known in Slavic legends and lore are not qliphothic demons, they are completely different spirits, specific to Slavic peoples and cultures. Now, they continued venerating dragon spirits. For those who don't know, dragon spirits are really intense forms of nature spirits. So you have fiery dragons, corresponding to fire. You have dragons of the air, of the water, of the earth, etc. So Vlad, as a noble, definitely possessed some of that knowledge and he used it for his own benefit. He was also a member of infamous Order of the Dragon, and goal of the order was pretty much to defend Slavic lands from the Ottoman Empire. You probably know that Vlad was one of the most valiant defenders of the Slavic lands from the Ottoman Empire, by the way, and that's how he actually entered the history books, not by killing children and drinking their blood. He was actually a brilliant military commander, a brilliant protector, and really effective ruler and administrator. And he practiced draconian sorcery. But no, he wasn't a vampire in a colloquial sense. Some of that vampire lore became attributed to him later on. But he himself was not a vampire. He was a draconian knight. Well, some of those draconian rites and rituals definitely include what we can consider vampirism. But when somebody works with draconian or dragon-like entities, he cannot be considered a vampire in a colloquial and traditional sense. It's a different form of a being, different form of an entity. So, if this wasn't enough for you, this video will kinda debunk and video series after this one, misconceptions about vampires. Now, the first misconception about the vampires is that vampire is necessarily some shitty, dark, sinister motherfucker edgelord. And that's not true. And I will give you really simple evidence that that's not true. So, in Serbian, Bosnian, Bulgarian lore, etc., you have two kinds of supernatural magical practitioner. One is essentially witch. We know what witch is according to the legend. But another form of supernatural magical practitioner is a dragon man or zduhach, right? But let's examine what witch is capable of doing and what zduhach is capable of doing. So witch is capable of what we know as soul travel, leaving her body and doing shit. Witch is capable of cursing people. Witch is capable of making children being miscarried and making women miscarry. Witch is capable of seeing the future. Witch is capable of binding, controlling, and summoning spirits. Witch is capable of altering the weather. Witch is capable of reversing the aging. You already know the legends. But what zduhach is capable of? Zduhach is capable to travel out of his own body and beat evil spirits which cause hail. Zduhach is capable of healing his community with spells. Zduhach is capable of shape-shifting into fucking dragon. Zduhach is capable of being supernaturally strong. Zduhach is capable of protecting people and cattle. Zdukhac is capable of shape-shifting into animals. Zdukhac is capable of living longer than usual and reversing the age process or the aging process. So, if we actually examine what Zdukhac is doing and what Witch is doing, it's pretty much the same age-old sorcery thing. But what's the difference between Zdukhac and a witch? Witch is predominantly traditionally female and Zdukhac is predominantly traditionally male, but it doesn't have to be the case. You have legends about male witches and female Zdukhaci. However, female Zdukhaci are really rare and male witches are really rare according to the legend. But the key difference between witch and Zdukhac is not a practical one, it is a moral one. According to the lore, both witches and Zdukhaci can be transformed into physical vampires after death, and for that reason, to both of them, the corpse is burned. Now, when I speak about vampire in this context, I also want to point out that magical practitioners are also known as vampires in Slavic lore. There is no distinction between witch and a vampire in many legends, and many Zdukhaci are known to engage in vampiric practices. But from these examples, I wanted to tell you that all of those practices, such as psychic vampirism, sorcery, etc., were practiced widely by people and weren't necessarily seen as evil as long as practitioner wasn't an asshole. So the hatred for the witches in traditional Slavic culture isn't hatred towards magical practitioners. It's a hatred towards magical practitioners who actually and actively abuse their abilities to ridiculous extent to exploit other people. So that's number one misconception about witches and vampires in popular culture. They weren't necessarily seen as evil 100% in Slavic lore. They were definitely seen as sinister, but not necessarily always as evil. There are exceptions. Now, number two misconception is that vampires are somehow in a Slavic context related to the Christian devil. And this misconception is kinda true. They are related to the devil, but this misconception is also really untrue, because devil, Slavic legends speak about, have nothing to do with Satan. As I said earlier, traditional Slavic vampire magic is taught by darker Slavic gods such as Morana, Chernobog, darker aspects of Diabog, dark water spirits, and that has nothing to do with Satan, nor the Christian devil, nor Christianity. Entire vampire tradition of the Slavic lands is actually pre-Christian. The third misconception about vampires we know from popular culture is that vampires are somehow beautiful, immortal, blood-drinking edgelords who live in big castles. That's not how Slavic lore describes them. I mean, it has some basis in reality, because many nobles engaged in those practices we know as vampirism, and as we already know, those practices can extend life, and nobles usually live in big castles, you know. But this misconception about beautiful, long-living edgelords in big castles is really inaccurate because, you know, majority of vampires recorded in history and in all of those witch trials were not nobles. They were ordinary people who practiced sorcery, usually to help their community, because majority of people who practiced sorcery with vampiric practices were known actually as duhachi, at least majority of recorded ones, and they technically helped community most of the time. And they were extremely revered and extremely appreciated by communities they inhabited. So, yeah, vampires in Slavic lore were not blood-drinking, murderous edgelords who lived in big castles. They were magical practitioners who were mostly part of the common people. Many of them were assholes and feared, some of them were not assholes and they were revered. So, the fourth misconception is that vampiric practices can be only practiced with some sinister dark divinities who live in some craveling cave, you know. It's all dark, it's all gloomy. No. There are actually really powerful divinities which you can use to practice vampirism with, which are actually attributed to the sun, believe it or not. So, the fiery dragon, which is the spirit Vlad Dracul, I mean historical Vlad Dracul, probably venerated, is actually burning dragon-like being attributed to the sun. And one of things he teaches is also extremely fiery and intense form of vampirism. So no, not all vampiric divinities are dark and gloomy. And not all vampiric divinities are lunar in nature. Many of vampiric divinities in Slavic lore are attributed to the sun. Like fiery dragon, for example. Another extremely powerful vampiric divinity, which is not so dark and gloomy, is technically Daibog the Lame. He is god of the dead, but he is not murderous, gloomy divinity. He is really kind and kind-hearted if you approach him directly. That also can be said for Chernobog in his lame aspect. Chernobog can be used to harness the energy of the sun, however, Chernobog is indeed the dark divinity. But you can use him to harness the more destructive aspects of the sun. As for Daibog the Lame, however, he is technically chthonic aspect of the Slavic sun god. I made a video about Daibog the Lame in the past, and that video is still on this channel. And the last misconception, number 5, for this video is that you need to be from a special bloodline to be a vampire. But this misconception is also true, but it is also untrue. So you see, in order for somebody to be attracted to vampirism, I sincerely believe that you have to have certain genetic predispositions. No matter how you try to teach sorcery of vampiric nature to somebody who isn't born into it, or is having preposition for it, they won't learn. If you don't have genetics which kinda helps you in being vampiric practitioner, you won't be vampiric practitioner. But also, you don't have to be from a super special bloodline to be a vampire, or vampiric practitioner, or practitioner of vampiric sorcery. You can learn this and kinda transform yourself. You don't have to be a hyper special motherfucker. So, those were 5 misconceptions about vampirism you often find in popular culture. And I hope you enjoyed this clip.